Okay, guys, so I suspected that we would go on for hours, and Bobby and I quite literally did. So, welcome back for part two. My name is John Dargue from A-dec. I'm the A-dec territory manager for the Southwest UK, and I am thrilled to be joined by dentist, business owner, mentor, and I said before, all-round good guy, really, Bobby Bhandal. So, welcome back for part two. So the thing that I'd like to explore next when you talk about patient demand is the sort of the type of clinical work that the practice is based on.
Yep.
So is that part of a formula for setting up a new squat practice that, there's a percentage that should be bread and butter general dentistry, that you should have some specialised treatments? Is there a ratio for that, or is that very much a personal thing?
There's no ratio, but if you're going to set a practice up from scratch, you have to be able to do high value work.
Okay.
So implants, smile makeovers, full mouth rehabs, because ultimately that kind of work brings in a significant income and significant turnover. So when you're setting up a squat, it's a race to that break-even point, and you need to get there as quick as possible to make sure you're in the green and your business doesn't fold.
Mm-hmm.
And the easiest and quickest way to do that is by doing high value treatment. And the great thing about doing that is it's not then volumes based. You don't need to be seeing thousands and thousands of patients doing checkups and low value work. You can have a smaller pool of patients, but you're doing higher value work. They're paying more money, but they're getting a better service, and you can give them more time. So our business model was based on that rather than a volumes, based model. General dentistry on its own is difficult. It can be done, but it's going to take longer, without a doubt.
Okay, but would you describe? So I know that you've obviously got a thriving and growing referral base at the moment. I know you do a lot of implant work. Is there an underlying core of general dentistry, and is that important?
Yes. So general dentistry is still bread and butter.
Okay.
So it's important to have that plan memberships, consistent monthly income. So it's good to have that, and plus that pool of patients generally is always going to need some form of work in the future as they age, old work that fails.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to have that. So it still forms a core component unless you're setting up a specialist referral clinic,
Okay.
where you're only doing specialist work. So as a general dental practice, yes, definitely you have that as a component, but you still have to focus a lot on the higher value treatments.
Okay. And how do you ensure that your practice, so I guess talking more about bricks, mortar and equipment now, how do you ensure that the practice that you start from scratch has the headroom to do all of those aspects of dentistry and continue growing?
Yeah. So it comes down to that initial investment. So you've got to make sure that you've got the practice set up, you've got the equipment, and you've got the space to do that. So I'll just give you an example. One of the most common things that gets asked is, if I'm going to be doing implants in my clinic, should I buy a CT scanner or should I send my patients elsewhere, because they cost so much and it's a big expense when you're starting out in your practice. For us, having that scanner was one of the best investments that we could have had, because our patients get an end-to-end service within the practice, and we can do that treatment. We don't have to send them elsewhere. We charge for it, so it covers the costs of what we paid for the equipment in the first place, and it's a win-win-win all around, and that allows us to provide that amazing service. One of the big things for me is never to invest in cheap equipment. If patients are going to be coming to our practice and they want high value work, we should rightly invest in good equipment, great chairs like A-dec, comfortable chairs, 3D scanners, like we were talking about earlier, we have a Trios. All of that forms the patient journey. Yes, it is an upfront cost, but in the long term, it pays for itself.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point, and I think also it's worth just mentioning at this point the fact that your network that you've developed at this point really helps with that process of equipment selection, doesn't it? Because ultimately people are looking for word of mouth referrals. You can't ultimately beat a word of mouth referral. That when somebody's had a good experience with, I mean, your dealer Bradgate, for instance, obviously people need to know where can they go for a good, reliable service where their practice can be brought to life. And you've got a network of people where you can say, oh, well, you're based here, and you can use, Bradgate.
Yeah, that's it, 100%. And they're pivotal, you know, when you're starting up your practice. So, you know, once you're setting up that practice journey, one of the biggest things is what equipment do I need and how much is it going to cost me? And this is one of the things where a lot of dentists get confused and try to penny pinch without understanding that that investment up front in good solid equipment that's going to last a long time is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
You know, should I buy a £5,000 chair from China or do I invest, you know, in something, you know, here that's solid and I know it's going to last? You know, if you work it out, you know, for us, when you do the maths, if you've got a surgery down for a day because something's not quite right or not working, you're losing £2,000 to £3,000 per day. So then it wasn't really worth buying cheap in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say, again, from my experience of seeing customers in the showroom, sometimes it can be a challenge for people to see past the headline price of a piece of equipment, can't it? And sometimes actually, I mean, again, you were talking about being financial savvy and being able to sort of see, well, actually, the cost of a piece of equipment will be broken down in such and such a way, and it's going to last you. So I guess low lifetime running costs are something that we talk about. But what you're saying about that downtime, it really, really resonates. And then the other thing, again, going back to sort of who you choose to partner with, I'm guessing you need to know that there's going to be people that can help to service that equipment, and if there is any downtime, that it's going to be absolutely minimised as well with response times and stuff.
Yeah, 100%. That's really, really important. You know, the companies that you work with, you know, for us, we've only ever had 2 issues with our dental chairs. Bradgate have pretty much been out on the same day and fixed whatever the issues were.
Yeah, fantastic.
And you know, that service is untouchable. You won't get that from every equipment company, but there are some out there. But you've got to go find the right ones, you know, that will look after you.
Yeah. But fortunately, for anybody on the Squat Success program, they've obviously got access to all of this knowledge and recommendation, and no matter where they are in the country, you'll be able to help them out with reliable partners. Yeah,
that's it, exactly. You know, we're really fortunate to build a great network with companies all over the UK now. Dentists, you know, in the group are setting up practices all over the country, so getting to know different companies through them. And you know, wherever you are, there's somebody that can help. And you know, even with yourselves, you know, you guys have, you know, recommended, you know, companies that you work with yourselves that are reputable. So you know, all forms part of that network and that community.
Yeah, fantastic. So, as I said a minute ago, that's kind of like sort of the bricks, mortar and equipment side of things. Moving on to developing a team, because you mentioned earlier on in terms of HR issues, how do you begin? So you've got a culture that you're trying to manifest, and that can only manifest through a team, right? Yeah. So how do you build that team and ensure that those people are the right fit for your practice?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. One of the hardest things of building a dental practice is that, without a doubt, is building the team. And it all starts from the top down. So you as the leader of the team and the leader of the business, your goal is to set the vision. What do you want your practice to look like? How do you want your patients to be looked after? What is the service you want to run? What is the culture you want to build? And you know, it stems right from you, and then you passing that vision on and sharing it. So I'm a strong believer that the more you put that vision out there, you'll attract the type of people that align with that back into your business. And that's exactly what's happened with us, and that's how we've grown our team. Because people have seen that and they've wanted to be part of it, and that way you avoid having to take on the wrong type of people. You know, when you're setting up a practice from scratch, you will get people that come into your business who aren't the right fit. We're not perfect at recruiting. You know, when you start, it's a journey for us as well. So it takes a little bit of learning, but the deeper you get into it, the more you start to figure out exactly the type of people that you want within your business.
And I guess it doesn't matter whether we're talking about recruitment and team members or a £5,000 dental chair. Mistakes are going to be made, right? And it's then about how you learn from it. I think probably one of the highlights of this conversation is throughout your journey, it's been, you know, where there has been that adversity, you learn from it and you drive forward, right?
Yep, exactly. And you know, what I always say to everybody is, generally, from my experience, and this is kind of across the board, most people who set up a squat practice, the team that's there in 12 months almost certainly won't be the same team that you started with.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and it's just part of the process. You know, like I said, you have to learn, you have to grow. And often, you know, one of the things that I found is that as your business goes through different stages, you know, setting up is one aspect, but then when you go through a big growth stage, sometimes the team that were there right at the beginning can't be the same team to take you to the next level either, because they haven't been through that process themselves. And you know, things change as your practice develops and it grows. And you need different people at different stages with different experience levels.
Okay.
So you know, it's constantly evolving, you know, as you go through your business.
And how do you ensure that when you find the right person, the right fit for your team, that are able to help take your business to the next level with you?
Yeah.
How do you keep them?
Yeah.
Because I know from speaking to dentists, like one of the biggest challenges at the moment is both attracting talent, which I think you've described how to do that pretty well, but also the retention of that talent as well. What are the key things that a dentist can do to keep that team member?
Yeah, so in my head, it's actually really simple. You just look after them really well.
Okay.
You care for them like you would your own family, because they are your family within your business. And without your business, you have no family, you have no livelihood. So you just look after them like you would your own family.
Yeah.
There's different aspects to it, you know, financial. You know, people want different things, and you have to figure out, you know, what floats their boat. You know, is it money? Is it days off? Is it, you know, they just want to thank you, you know, when they've done something well. But you know, rewarding them, you know, when it's appropriate. You know, giving feedback. You know, sharing. You know, one of the things that we do in the business is I share everything about the business, you know, with the team. You know, a lot of things that most dentists would never do in their own practices. You know, financials, you know, how we're doing. You know, if the team don't know what the goals are, how are you going to get there? What's the point in hiding it from them? They're a part of it.
Yeah. So real transparency about the journey that you're all on together.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think it's interesting.
And that makes them feel part of the business. You know, doing that is the difference between them feeling like an employee and them feeling like they're a part of your business.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that there's talking about culture and that care for people. There's a lot of synergies, to be honest, between the A-dec business that I work in and between, I think, some of your philosophies. I mean, we have 15 core principles. It's called the A-dec way, and it's basically 15 core principles of how the company was founded, and I guess coming back to that sort of manifestation of culture. And one of it is care for people. And I think that there's a lot of different things with regards to, as you've just said, in terms of people's individual motivations for what keeps them happy at work. But I guess wanting to selfishly relate this to dental equipment, I mean, I have literally had a situation at the last dental show where a nurse came onto the stand to talk about stalls, and she was in tears because of the amount of pain that she was in with the equipment that she was working. How important is it to select the right equipment, again, for your team?
Yeah. So if your team is crying because they're in chronic back pain, they're not going to function at work. So again, it's really simple. You put in the best equipment that allows them to do their job properly and function as optimally as possible.
Yeah.
You know, it's that equipment, we're using that day to day. Yeah, dentistry, we're in that room, we're in those four walls. It's super important to be comfortable. You know, and that's how you're going to get the best out of your team. You know, it's not just that for your patients as well. Your patients are going to be comfortable. If you've got a patient who's sat in the chair for 4 hours, you're doing full arch surgery, you know, you can't put them in a chair that's not comfortable. Yeah, they will complain. You know, I was, I shouldn't actually say this, but I was at a friend's practice. I was mentoring for some implant work, and you know, that surgery was only about an hour and a half. And when we put the patient back up, that patient complained so much about how uncomfortable he was because of the chair. You know, it's a fairly old chair. Can't remember what it was exactly, but we've never had that complaint. We have patients in that chair 5-6 hours.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Do you know, it's really interesting because you were talking about patient journey earlier on.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was talking to one of our marketing team the other day about a practice. It was actually one of my very first showroom visits. And the dentist had put a great deal of thought into the practice journey and all of the different touch points, even from how easy it's to get from the car park through the door and making sure that, you know, just making everything as easy as possible for the patient. But hadn't actually ever considered the relationship between the dental chair and the patient experience, which I thought was interesting. And again, I mean, I've mentioned the showroom quite a lot, guys, but if you ever want to come and sort of explore that touch point for your patients, and also coming back to that nurse that was crying about working in pain, I think in dentistry, it's all too often accepted that working in pain is sort of just part and parcel, and it doesn't have to be. So if you're working in pain, do get in touch with A-dec and we'd be happy to help. So bringing it back to the practice then. So I know that your practice is expanding, and it's growing, and it's doing really, really well. I think thriving is probably an appropriate word. So you've got the practice set up, you've got a team. How do you make sure that you can continue to grow? What sort of things do people need to do when they're on that journey?
Yeah, so continual growth is based upon a few things. So the team has to keep growing without a doubt. Dentists who can all do different types of treatment, you know, even the things that you don't want to do, and then having the support team around that to support that. Second thing is investment in equipment again. So as you're expanding, you're putting in more surgeries, more chairs, and you need to make sure that you've got adequate funding available for that. So one of the things that gets neglected, I think, is when you're growing a business, is the cash flow situation. And one of the things I found with some dentists is that they don't actually account for the fact that in 12 months' time, you might be ready then at that point to open a second or a third surgery, but you've got to make sure there's some money left in the bank to be able to do that, because you might end up in a situation where you've got more patient demand, but then you don't have enough funding available to actually service that. So, you know, one of the biggest things is keeping an eye on that, you know, the financial situation.
That must be a really difficult decision to make, to commit to that. I mean, ultimately, your business has got to get to a point where you're just about managing to contain demand, and then you've got to make a decision to make that investment. How do you know that you're at that right point of, I guess, saturation, and that you can make that next step? Yeah,
so for me, it was a case of running that first surgery until we, you know, essentially were 2 to 3 weeks booked ahead, you know, consistently. And then at that point, I knew I've got enough space now to fill that second surgery. So you don't want to do it too prematurely, because then you're going to be left with an empty surgery. But you don't want to do it too late either, because then you have the opposite problem, that you'll be losing patients because you can't get them in quick enough.
Sure.
It's a difficult decision. It's really hard to know exactly, you know, when to pull that trigger. But one of the things that you'll probably find is that when you do pull the trigger, it's more of an incentive for you than to fill that surgery, so you'll do it. And you'll make things happen to make it happen. Because you know you've just spent the money to kit that out, and you don't have a choice now, because now you've got bills to pay, and you've got to make it work.
No,
it kicks your brain into another gear.
So looking at, I guess, going even further forward than that, how far forward do you need to be thinking about your own involvement in the business? I mean, you've got to. I guess we're going full circle here, because you talked about building a personal brand, and I know you've got a very clear vision of where you see yourself within the business, and obviously you've got other things going on with Squat Success, etc. Is that a really important thing to have from the beginning, sort of a vision of where you are within your business? Yeah,
it's really important, because that has a big impact on who you recruit in your business, which dentists you're going to have, what type of treatments you're going to be doing, and also financially as well. You know, it's very different if you want to run your business as a principal-led business and you're working clinically 5 days a week, as to if you're having an associate-led business. And you've got to make sure that that's sustainable, you know, in the long term. You know, for me, I always had a really clear vision. As I told you guys before, I love doing surgical work, implants, and ideally, my week, I just want to be doing that and nothing else whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, a couple of days on that, and my associates are doing everything else. And touch wood, after a year and a half, I'm finally on that path.
And we were discussing earlier on
Yeah,
that you had a bit of a taster of sort of what that letting go of the reins slightly was like when you were on holiday. Was it last week, I think you said? And how did you find that being away from the business that you've grown?
Yeah, so it was an absolutely great feeling being away from your business, knowing that patients are still being seen, the business is still making money, and everything's ticking over quite nicely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being a business owner, you can't switch off from it.
Right.
It's very, very difficult. Problems happen, niggles happen, the phone still rings, the team still want help and support and advice. So, we're not there yet, but I'm confident we will get there, another year and a half. And I'm confident enough that I'll be able to leave those doors and things will run.
Fantastic.
And that's my vision.
Yeah. Awesome. And so what's next for Squat Success?
Yeah, Squat Success is going through a big growth phase at the moment. So as I said, it's constantly changing based on the feedback from the delegates and the help and the support they need. So at the moment, we've got lots of dentists who are going to be opening new practices this year. There's a big group at the moment, so over the next 12 to 18 months, there should be a lot of new squats opening within that group. So at the moment, things are running quite well, but for me, it's a matter of making it bigger and better. So over the next 6 months, working out exactly what we can do to support these practices and also how to support them once they're open. And, what are they going to need at that point?
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's very heavily based upon getting your practice up and running. But it's becoming clear that there's a big demand for what do we do now once practice is open?
Okay.
How do we get it to grow? How you've grown your practice as quick or quicker.
And to come back to a question that I asked earlier on, this doesn't need to be just exclusive to people that are setting up a brand new practice. There are going to be, I would have thought, really, really valuable lessons for people that are already owning a dental practice.
Yeah, 100%. So, within the group, we've got dentists who already own practices.
Okay.
Some of them are moving sites, but they've never done it before. So it's essentially like setting up a squat. But even those dentists that are coming in are learning things about how to grow their existing business and realizing that there was actually more room within what they've got before they even needed to move it, which is interesting. So there's dentists who've bought practices and exactly like that. So they want to know how to build it, grow it, scale it. So, it covers a range of things, so there's help there for whatever you need.
Fantastic. So are there any final thoughts before we wrap up? Because I feel like we've covered a lot, but I also feel like I could carry on for ages, to be honest with you. So have you got any final thoughts, any nuggets of advice that you'd like to leave with people that are maybe they've got the drive to set up their own practice, but maybe not the confidence? Anything that you'd say to those guys? Yeah,
so my biggest piece of advice is that if it's something you want to do, you have to do it, because otherwise you will get to the end of your life and you will regret never taking that jump. We're really, really lucky that we're in a profession that if you took the jump and if things didn't work out the way you expected, you can recover quite quickly. And that doesn't happen very often. It's very, very rare. And with our support and help, that definitely would never happen. But it's one of those that you don't want to get to the end and regret it, because you don't know what's on the other side. For me, going down this journey of opening the practice, it's opened more doors in my life than I ever could have imagined. And if I look back now and think if I was just stuck in those four walls as an associate doing the same thing over and over again, I would never have the life that I have now, and all the opportunity, and be doing all the great things and have my own practice. One of the things that gives me the biggest amount of joy is seeing patients leave that practice happy. Last night we were in the practice till 9 o'clock. We were doing a big veneer case, full upper arch, and when they sit up and you have that conversation with them, and knowing that, you know, you built that environment for them to come to have that treatment, and the experience that they've had. And if you hadn't done that, where else would they have gone? And would they have got the same?
And I think it's probably key to say that could be the difference between that patient undertaking that treatment, full stop, couldn't it, at the end of the day? Because a lot of people walking into a dental practice are somewhere on the scale of anxiety. And if they're walking in and they don't feel like they can, you know, as you were saying a minute ago, sort of stay in the chair for 4 hours, that could be the difference between that treatment happening or not, couldn't it? Yeah,
well, I mean, we see a huge amount of anxious patients. You know, we do sedation in the practice, and, you know, these patients all tell us exactly what you just said, that if we hadn't come here, we never would have had this still. And it's all because of how we set the practice up. You know, when they come, they feel so relaxed. It's so different. And, you know, if they'd walked into any other practice, they just wouldn't have gone ahead with the treatment, because they would have been in a different environment, and it would have been a lot more clinical related, and, you know, they just wouldn't have had that same experience. And it's sad, because they then would be still struggling. They're still going to be in pain. They're still going to be having problems. And, you know, if we hadn't built what we built, they never would have come and had the treatment that they need. Absolutely. So I think that's quite a nice place, I think, to wrap up, really, guys, is that you can take the message that that market sentiment, that the demand is still there and patient expectations are higher than ever. And if you've got a dream and a vision of bringing a practice to life, like Bobby's describing, the patients are there, and they will come. So I think, I think that's probably a wrap, Bobby, to be honest. I think, as I've said, guys, if you are in that position where you dream of owning your own practice, but you're not quite sure how to get started, Bobby's Squat Success program is going to be super valuable for you. And again, just to bring it back to sort of my realm, if you're working in pain or discomfort, or if you're thinking about what type of equipment would be suitable for those long treatment times and assisting in that patient journey that we've been talking about, please do get in touch. Bobby, are there any shameless plugs that you want to get in before we wrap up? No, none at all. I think you've done it all for me.
Awesome. Okay.
But no, I just want to say that, you know, from our point of view, setting up the practice, you know, Bradgate, obviously excellent. And yourselves have been so supportive. Like I say, you guys hosted us in the showroom, and I'm sure that's going to happen again, you know, at some point with a much bigger group, you know, hopefully some point later this year. And your support has been fantastic. I love A-dec chairs. So,
there is nothing more. There is no more shameless plug than that, Bobby. So I appreciate it. Listen, guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. Bobby, thank you so much for taking out the time to come and join me today. What I'm going to do, guys, is I'll make sure that all of the links to the Squat Success and social media profiles, and to being able to book a showroom appointment, all of those links will be in the description down below. Until next time, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.